Hi, everyone. Welcome to my talk. I am Geeky Faye of Geeky Faye Art, and you are currently watching Tech and Creativity, 3D printing as an artistic medium. And I'm actually super excited to be here. This is my first talk, maybe ever. So you guys are really lucky to get to see my first ever talk. But I want to get to it. I want to tell you guys about this stuff and why it's incredible. But 3D printing, it's a well known at this point as an extraordinary technology that is rapidly propelling us into the future. The industrial uses for additive manufacturing, whether it's aerospace production, medical advances, or are well documented in their efficiency, flexibility, and ingenuity. In addition to all this, desktop 3D printing has taken a massive leap forward in terms of accessibility of cost and ease of use in recent years, bringing the technology more and more into the public eye. 3D printing has become an engineer's playground, ripe for further tinkering and development, which is amazing, except I'm not actually an engineer. I can't really talk in great detail or at great length about all the things I mentioned previously, because beyond what I've read and taught myself, I have no professional background in industrial additive manufacturing. I'm not an engineer of any kind, nor a programmer or a scientist. I'm actually part of the A in STEAM, an artist with an immense love for and geeky passion for technology that keeps me exploring and searching for new ways to express my creativity. Enter in consumer-grade desktop 3D printing, a technology typically approached from a technical or scientific angle, but this time put in the hands of a curious and perhaps mildly eccentric artist. The things that I've discovered and skills that I've added to my repertoire since stumbling into this remarkable bit of tech continue to amaze me. Adding 3D printing to my creative toolbox has been one of the single most fun and exciting leaps I've made in my artistic career, and I'd love to see it embraced more for this purpose, both by art veterans and the newly creative alike. If you don't already know who I am, I go by Geeky Faye on the internet, and I am the face, hands, brain, and brawn behind Geeky Faye Art. Inspiring the masses to find new wells of creativity within themselves is more or less what drives my content, along with my own diverse sources of inspiration. I'm basically coming into this stuff from a standpoint of not just being an artist, but also being a geek, but like my name implies. I've always been inspired real strongly by sci-fi and kind of fantasy video games and that sort of stuff, which is, I think, part of the reason why 3D printing felt like such a natural thing to kind of get into. It is basically sci-fi as far as I'm concerned. It's a replicator. It can replicate on command. And so that was a perfect kind of setup, a perfect background for me to kind of find this technology and get into it, because, well, it is basically magic. It is basically sci-fi. I also have a background in theater, and I love costumes and wearable art. And so this has definitely been a large inspiration in my work, as well as being fascinated by science, emerging technologies, and history. I still have incredibly fond memories of going to my very first SIGGRAPH and getting to see all the emerging technologies there. So kind of between all of these things, having technology be a part of my kind of creative mediums it just made sense. It just made sense. My background in 3D art and design was a perfect springboard to dive headlong into 3D printing. I've had a lifelong interest in technology, so like very much being into sci-fi and stuff like that, definitely it did make it only a matter of time. I definitely think that I was slated to get into 3D printing pretty much from the get-go. Now, as I mentioned just briefly, I have a bit of a background in 3D art and design, but always in a purely kind of digital kind of background in a digital scene. And nothing I created for the longest time ever left a computer or TV screen. It never existed in reality, in real life, as a physical thing. So 3D printing kind of introduced a new area of opportunity for skills that I already had. Now, I kind of discovered 3D printing about 3 years ago, and I started with a Flash Forge Finder, which was super teeny tiny. I don't actually have it here. I don't have it anymore. But it was the perfect place for me to start. I knew nothing coming in. I am entirely self-taught, and I just kind of experimented until I started to figure things out. Now, before too long, I got this wonderful machine, which you see here, which is a Prusa Mark III's, which is considered the Cadillac of desktop 3D printing by many people, and has served me incredibly well. As you can kind of see, I've done a lot of modifications to it to kind of make it that much better of a machine, and including adding this lovely light here. But from there, I have also added in an even larger machine, a Creality CR10S Pro V2, which increases my capacity in creation, which is amazing. But I didn't actually know anything about 3D printing coming into this. I'm entirely self-taught. And pretty much all of the learning I've done has been through online communities. 3D printing is based so strongly in these online communities, and without them, somebody like me would have actually been a bit left in the dark. Websites like all3dp.com and Matter Hackers, just as two examples, have been really integral to helping people like myself kind of become introduced to the technology, to kind of the programming side of it, to the technical aspects of it. And communities like on Reddit and Discord are just absolutely integral for that learning process, because again, there's no classroom necessarily to be learning this. But of course, none of this would be complete without 3D printing YouTube effectively, which has introduced me to people like Joel Telling, a 3D printing nerd, Angus Devisit of Maker's Muse, and Teaching Tech, which is an amazing channel, Michael out of Australia, which all of these played a huge role in kind of allowing me to access the technology as an artist, somebody who doesn't necessarily have a background in programming or in engineering. I didn't know how any of these machines worked starting out. So the fact that I do now, I think, is an incredible testament to these online communities and kind of the things that you can learn with this. Now, art. Like I said, I'm an artist, and so I'm approaching this from that perspective. And from the very beginning, I approached 3D printing with an artistic eye. I was, of course, aware of how many other people used it and how it could be used, but as an artist, I was curious to find out how I could make this machine work for me in a way not dissimilar to other mediums that I used in my work. Like, what could it do to enhance me as an artist? Now, my background originally was in traditional art. I've used pencils and pens and paint and markers and pretty much anything I can get my hand on, including ceramics and metalworking and all sorts of things. So I very much am a hands-on person, and I was thrilled at the idea of being able to kind of translate my digital work into something physical again. Like, 3D art is long established as a useful and fascinating medium, but generally speaking, it's used strictly digitally in films and TV shows and games and commercials. I usually joke a bit with people that they have no idea exactly how much 3D art they're actually viewing on a day-to-day basis, because so much of it is so realistic you can't even tell anymore. But it's largely just existed in this digital arena. And so being able to take it and actually translate it into the physical is an incredible opportunity and a fantastic tool to have. Now, 3D sculpting allows for creation of things that are otherwise difficult or impossible to do by hand, but also things that can be done by hand, and just a different way to do them. Things like kind of models like these. Obviously, something like this could be sculpted by hand, but being able to sculpt it digitally is perhaps faster, easier. It uses less physical resources. I don't necessarily have to worry about clay or a kiln or anything like that. And as you can kind of see, the results are spectacular. You can achieve amazing results with digital sculpting, and 3D printing suddenly makes them real. It turns the digital into the physical. And not to excuse this guy's brain showing, he had some troubles in the printing process, and now he's had a transplant. But it allows you to take these things that previously only existed on a computer. They weren't tangible, and suddenly they are real. And this happens in a matter of hours or days instead of weeks and weeks like it may take to actually sculpt something by hand. It's useful for both organic and inorganic things. Like this is, I think, a fantastic example of something that would be incredibly difficult to actually sculpt by hand. But thanks to 3D printing and 3D design, is not just entirely doable, but not that difficult. Something like this, I was able to create in a matter of hours on the computer, and then print in, admittedly, about a day. It's a very long print, but something like this with these small holes, this is something that human hands would struggle with. And so to be able to physically create that with the help of, effectively computer aided graphics, you're accessing things that artists previously, even 20, 30 years ago, couldn't access. And I think that is not to be understated at all. Digital sculpture is also really useful for low resource planning of large physical sculpts, because instead of needing to procure a great deal of physical materials and resources, you can plan it digitally and then actually just print it. You can then 3D print quite large. You don't necessarily need a massive machine to print large. You can print in pieces and finish with physical skills. But you're then only sculpting once instead of sculpting twice, planning digitally and then re-sculpting in a physical form. It's honestly, like I said before, it's basically magic. The stuff that you can create is truly extraordinary. Software packages like Fusion 360 for parametric design and ZBrush or Blender for organic sculpting create a fantastic bridge between digital design and the physical outcome. Now, parametric is very, very useful. Parametric design, a parametric 3D 3D design is basically, I always say, like the vector of 3D design. It's infinitely scalable, being that it's based on maths, and it's very easy to test for printability. And so, because the software itself has a lot of built-in functionality for things like 3D printing, you're able to make sure that your creation is going to be good to print, because it is not as simple, sadly, as creating a digital design, creating a bit of 3D art, and then pressing a button to print it. Obviously, 3D printing is a little bit more complex than that. It does require, files require a bit of preparation to be printable. So parametric is fantastic for that. It makes it very simple, and it's fantastic for inorganic things. Again, all of these lovely vases that you can see here, these were all designed in Fusion 360. I did not design them all personally, but these were all designed in Fusion 360, whereas these were designed in ZBrush as more organic shapes. Now, something like that actually does tend to require a little bit more human hands, a little bit more involvement to prepare it for 3D printing, because polygonal modeling is much more, I suppose you could say, static in the digital space. It has so many polygons. It is a static amount. You can change the amount, but it doesn't change with scaling. So polygonal modeling requires a little bit more tweaking to prepare for printing. You have to make sure that you've got enough polygons for smooth results, but low enough that the printer doesn't choke, because unfortunately, the files that 3D printers take, there is a bit of a limit to how large they can be, how much information is in the file. and too much information, and they don't do very well. So it's very important to make sure that you're in that kind of that middle zone for that. And this is definitely a skill that you learn and get better with practice, I've learned. Additionally to this, meshes have to be watertight. They can't have holes. They can't have polygons overlapping. If they do, again, things will break. So it's not as simple as being a digital sculptor and overnight being able to create these things in a physical form via a 3D printer. The technology is great, but it's maybe not that perfect. So it does require a bit of skill, but it does also introduce a whole bunch of more options that I think make it an incredible thing kind of over, again, traditional sculpting. Now, one of the things that I absolutely love about 3D printing as an artistic medium, whether it's an FDM filament extrusion style printer like I have here, or a stereolithographic resin style printer, is the incredible range of material types that you can work with. Now, pretty much everything you see here is printed in PLA, which is just is your basic FDM printing filament. And it's great, honestly, because it's both cheap and easy to use, and it's incredibly accessible. So it really is the predominantly kind of what I use. It fits for most circumstances, and I don't really have much need for much else. But there are many other options that give you more room to be creative. There are materials such as PETG and ABS, which are going to be fantastic if you're creating something that needs to be harder wearing or heat resistant or just generally stronger. I don't know, if you have some sort of presentation piece perhaps, or something that's going to live outside in a kind of installment, you're going to want it to be a little bit stronger. There's also all sorts of exotic materials, which are just incredible, I think, for additional expressing of creativity. There are wood fill filaments that basically are like creating an MDF wood. And the end result is something that is basically like a wood carving, but without any woodworking skills. You don't have to have access to a workshop and the skills as a woodworker to be able to create in wood. And it's fantastic because you can apply traditional kind of wood finishing techniques to these wood filament prints, like sanding and staining and varnishing, and you get something that, again, would ordinarily require a whole other skill set and something you don't need. Same with metal fill filaments. There are absolutely filaments that you can get that have copper, that have stainless steel basically built into the filament, and you can actually just print on these machines. It doesn't require any special, there's obviously 3D printers that are built for printing in metal, and these aren't, but these metal filaments are the exception. You can basically create cast metal sculpture without the casting process. So that opens up a lot of opportunities for, again, a lot of artists who might not necessarily have these skills in metalworking or in casting. There's also all sorts of other creative and interesting things that you can actually print in, like cork fill, there's sculptable filament, there are flexible filaments. So like you're not being restricted to a simple plastic end result. You are able to create something that's far more interesting and diverse than just plastic. Though, again, there's a lot you can actually do with that. Now, there's also a range of exciting resins available, but I don't actually know as much about them because I don't have a resin printer. So I'm not going to go too much into that because I'm simply don't feel qualified to speak about it, if I'm being completely honest. Now, with the previous use case in mind of sculpting and printing your sculpts or printing these things kind of for a physical use, one of the most common and popular methods to turn 3D printed objects into brilliant end results is to employ a range of finishing techniques to take the printed piece to the next level. I mentioned before the ability to print a large thing in pieces. That would be an excellent example of something like this. You can print a large scale sculpture in individual pieces and assemble those pieces into your final piece. With this sort of use, it doesn't actually require any fancy material. This absolutely can be done with your PLA, with your cheap PLA. It doesn't need to be in fancy colors. It can absolutely be done in the most basic of resources. But it allows you to expand exponentially kind of on what you have to hand. It also allows you to hide imperfections and kind of it lets you take a single piece and break it into multiples for, say, perhaps again, in the case of having a display somewhere else, you can print it in individual pieces and then assemble it on site so that you don't have to necessarily worry about something breaking in transit. Obviously, that is a devastating thing that nobody wants to go through. But application of filler and primer not only allows you to kind of put individual pieces together to create a larger end piece, but it also will hide layer lines and mechanical imperfections. Honestly, a lot of people don't necessarily like the look of layer lines in their 3D prints if they're doing FDM printing. And so those physical techniques, those physical artist techniques allow you to effectively create something with an incredible high-end finish. And there is so much that you can do there as well with kind of additional creative skills and stuff like that, a application of additional artistry and physical mediums, paint, airbrushing, hand sculpted materials. I've seen automotive painting techniques applied to 3D prints to get incredible shine finishes and stuff like that. It is truly incredible. And like you can get kind of end results that are basically like something you would purchase in a store, where you don't have the differences between the 3D print and, say, something that's injection molded can become indiscernible. So not to mention the fact that you can have the enjoyment of basically getting to paint something that you might not necessarily get to paint otherwise. And that can be really incredible. So you can also, I can't believe I skipped over this, but you can effectively do mixed media applications as well that you wouldn't necessarily get to do otherwise too. This was actually an experiment with alcohol markers, Copic markers, and a PLA 3D print. I wanted to see how these two materials would work together. And the results, as you can kind of see, are quite interesting. I don't know if it wants to focus. There we go. The results were quite interesting, and not to mention enjoyable. It was a lot of fun to do. So there's so much that you can kind of do there. So many ways in which you can express yourself creatively with basically a combination of 3D printing and physical techniques, traditional art techniques, to get some things that ordinarily would take considerably longer and be much, much harder to do. But that's not it. When it comes to end results that rely on aesthetics, it is often thought that 3D printing, and especially FDM 3D printing, is imperfect and an imprecise method of creation due to things like mechanical imperfections and the lack of incredibly fine resolution in FDM prints, resulting in perceptible layer lines. I think that if your intention is to create a piece that is flawlessly smooth, or perhaps mimicking another artistic medium that displays a unique visual quality, then yes, these imperfections can present an impediment. However, I don't think that these qualities of a 3D print need to necessarily be viewed as inherent flaws, so much as potential opportunities for creative applications that are both unique in form and engaging in aesthetic. This isn't necessarily a popular opinion, because I know that many people do feel like layer lines are an eyesore, but I actually feel like layer lines can be worked into the aesthetic of a piece. Now, FDM 3D printers tend to come with a range of nozzle sizes. Now, I don't have any printers that are going truly exceptionally large, but even these printers, you can go up to kind of 0.8 millimeters or 1 millimeter size nozzles, so that you're not only getting larger lines of extrusion, but larger layers. And so the layer lines go from something that is a side effect to something that is embraced and on purpose. And so you're able to get, come on, you can do it. There we go. I don't know how well you can see the layer lines here, but you are able to get a look and a feel and an aesthetic that is completely unique to 3D printing, to FDM 3D printing, that I think can be embraced to create a whole new creative aesthetic. I think that the thick layer lines can 100% be turned into the art. And that is, I think, truly incredible. Mathematic and generative design and 3D printing also is an amazing avenue that is not explored nearly enough and can, again, be kind of melded together with that, with those thick layer lines to create amazing things. Now, unfortunately, I don't necessarily have an example here to show, but there are people who have much larger facilities and greater amounts of money to work with than I have are creating gigantic 3D printers to create new forms of abstract art, things with layer lines that are basically the thickness of my finger or greater. And I know that it's not an unknown thing that kind of large 3D printers are 100% being used to create incredible advances in, say, house building, providing houses to poor communities because they're printing effectively in concrete. And those things are incredible, but it's actually very nice to see that there are people out there taking this kind of large format extrusion 3D printing and creating art, creating beautiful aesthetic things that don't necessarily serve a purpose, but are extraordinary all the same. These things have so much potential because, again, you're kind of skipping a lot of the process in using a machine to kind of create these end pieces. You can blend colors and materials and create things in an amount of time that would ordinarily be impossible. So basically, the concept of a maker has introduced a new arena for creatives like myself, one that allows a melding of traditionally artistic methods, historically scientific pursuits, and cutting-edge technology in a way that enables a whole new avenue for creative expression. The idea of art is not a concept that benefits from being kept pure, in my personal opinion, but instead is one that is improved dramatically by growing and adapting to blend with new technology as it's developed. I feel very strongly that my own art, my own creativity has benefited massively from the inclusion of new technologies in my toolbox. And I look forward to continuing to make new discoveries in the name of visual arts. If you're a creative person who's curious about integrating technology into your craft, or perhaps a technical person with creative inklings, I cannot recommend highly enough merging these two ideas into one. While the technical may keep us all moving forward into the future, the creative, the visually pleasing, the playful exploration is what will keep our souls nourished and our minds engaged. If you enjoyed this talk, and if you enjoyed kind of the things that I showed off and my ideas and my energy or what have you, please be sure to check out my website. It is geekyfaye.art. That's geekyfaye.art to learn more about me and to follow me on social media. I'm constantly sharing the things that I'm discovering and doing with the world because I want to see more people getting involved with technology and creativity and putting these things together. So I hope that you enjoyed my talk today, and I hope that I will see you all in the outside real soon. Thank you again, and have a great one.